Hi everyone, this is Yana Smakula for SimonsSTM.com. Welcome back for another Yippee for Yana episode. In this video, we are doing some simple ink blending with the Simons STM Festive Bough pattern stencils. When I saw this stencil set, I was immediately drawn to it and I couldn't wait to give it a try. Here I have my Simons STM Pawsitively sticky matte. This is the 8x8 matte, and I have a sheet of hammermill cardstock. This is cut to 4¼ by 5½ inches. I will trim it down later, but for now, this is the size I'm starting with, as I will be making an A2 card. Here I have my stencil layer number 1, and I was just bringing this stencil up close to the camera to remind you that there is the front, and then there is a back side to each stencil. And when you work with layering stencils or building stencils, or whenever you have a set of stencils with multiple stencils in that set, you need to remember to always use either the front or the back side. Otherwise, you're not going to get a good image. Why I'm saying this? Because, well, I did that when I started to film this video. I ink blended the first layer, and then I wanted to align the second layer, and I was like, this is not right. Why is this not working? So just a reminder, take a look at the etchings on your stencils. And by the way, these are etched. So on the stencil in the corner, you will see either the stencil SKU, so the code or the name, and then you might also see in some instances stencil layer number. What I did here is I positioned my stencil, and I also used tape in the corner, and I created sort of like a little corner for myself. I do this whenever I work with layering stencils to make it easier to layer the next layer. I guess that's the right thing to say. Anyhow, I added a little piece of yellow tape. This is the Best Ever Craft tape from Spellbinders in that left bottom corner to create a corner to make it easier to align the next layer of the stencil. And I started ink blending. For my very first layer, I'm using a combination of Pearfection and Pine inks from Simons STM. And I'm also using the Simons STM brushes to apply the ink. I first used the large size brush to apply the Pearfection ink, and then I used a smaller brush to apply Pine. So I have a little bit of ink blending or shading here. I have a lighter and a darker green. And then I came back to that larger brush and Pearfection ink, and I blended or smoothed those colors out. And here's a look at our first layer. Looks fabulous. For the second layer, we have these adorable bows. And by the way, you can even ink blend the bows alone on, on a different background, on a different card. And I kind of think they would look really, really fun. So did you just notice how I was able to easily position this layer without much effort, without much aligning? I simply tucked or place the corner of the stencil in the corner there where I have my Best Ever Craft tape. Super easy. So if you don't yet use this trick, give it a try. It saves a ton of time when working with layering stencils. So next I'm using red, and I have Cranberry, and I just applied this ink using my large Simons STM brush, and I'm also bringing in some brick color, which is the slightly darker red, to again have a little bit of a color variation. I have a little bit of shading there. I don't want to have just one flat layer, one flat color. I want there to be a little bit of the lighter color and a darker color. Coming back to my large blending brush with the Cranberry ink, going to smooth it all out, and let's go ahead and remove this stencil. And oh my goodness, doesn't that look beautiful? It's just amazing. I love stencils like this. They always give amazing results. Okay, moving on to stencil layer number 3. And once again, I use that little L shape in the corner to align this layer, and boom, we're done. So for this layer, we are ink blending with Sprout. This is my lighter green, and I'm also going to add shading with Field. Here I'm using a small blending brush just because I ran out of the large blending brushes for green colors. And I'm also going to come in with a detail blending brush to add that darker field color. If you want to recreate a background like this, the key is to have 2 shades of one color for each layer, and then have different size brushes to do your ink blending. It helps to have a large blending brush to apply a whole bunch of color quickly onto a background. You might want to apply your lighter color using a large blending brush, and then use a small blending brush or a detailed blending brush if you want to add little shading, little details to your ink blending. That's always super, super helpful. And you don't have to have a whole bunch of blending brushes. You can also have one brush for, a light and a dark color, but just make sure that you clean the brushes in between those colors, especially if you're switching from dark to light. If you're going from light to dark, obviously you don't really need to clean the brush, but if you want to go back, make sure you clean it. Just, like scribble it on a piece of scrap paper. I then go back to my lighter color to Sprout, and I re-blend everything using that color, and check out this background. Oh, so good. You could have used a totally different color if you wanted this layer to stand out some more, and you can see that on the back of the packaging on the example, also on the Simon Says Stamp website. You can see that this layer was done in a slightly like a blue-green color combination. You can definitely do that if you want to. I wanted my colors to be mostly green, so that's why I used green. And we're down to our final layer, and here I am using, once again, Cranberry ink and that large blending brush, and applying a whole bunch of red on here. With stencils, you can also use texture pastes if you have any. So you can think about replacing one of the layers, and instead of using ink, use a texture paste, or apply texture paste if it's like a sparkle texture paste over ink blending. You can do that. And also with stencils, you can emboss, dry emboss. I did that for one of the cards. So I did a test card before filming this video, and I embossed the background using one of the stencil layers. It's very hard to see. It's literally almost invisible, but it gives that beautiful tactile feeling. So if you hold a card in your hand, you can definitely feel that embossing. So that's one of the things that you can try. I didn't do any embossing for this card. I did slightly different things, and I'll show you those in just a second. So my next step is I want to add some stamping over this image. And for that, I'm using the white Christmas text background stamp from Simon Says Stamp, and I have Fawn Positively Saturated ink, and I'm stamping the text over my ink blended background. You probably can't see it, or if you can see very little. It's very faint stamping. And that's exactly how I want it. I don't want the text to overpower my ink blended background. I just want there to be a hint of stamping in the background, just like a little bit, just a suggestion of something extra happening in the background. And here's a look at this background, ink blended and stamped, and I just love it. I'm next going to use my paper trimmer and trim this to size. So at the beginning of this video, I said that I was working with a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch panel, and I'm actually going to trim this to 3 3/4 by 5 inch panel. The other card, the panel on that card is 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. And you can trim it down even more if you want a smaller panel, and if you want a larger white border on your finished card. I will be foam mounting this onto an A2 card base, a white card base, to have a nice white border on my card. So if you want to do that, and if you want to have a wider border, you might want to trim this down even more, but I quite like this particular size. Okay, with the trimming done, I'm bringing back that same Fawn ink pad, and I have a large blending brush, and I'm going to add ink blending around the edges just to darken those edges a little bit and bring the eye of the viewer to the center of my card. I love how I have those 3 bows in there centered. So this other card here, I did not do any ink blending around the edges, and you can see how different they look. This panel is also one that's slightly larger. It's the 4 by 5 1/4 inch panel. So you can see the two cards, or the two backgrounds rather, side by side. Okay, next we need to add a sentiment because no card is complete without a sentiment. And for that, I'm using a new sentiment stamp from Simon Says Stamp. This is the Making Spirits Bright by Kathy Zilski. Kathy is amazing. I absolutely love the fonts and the style of the sentiments that she does. So of course I wanted to make a card using one of Kathy's sentiments. I stamped the Merry and Bright sentiment in clear embossing ink. That was Simon Says Stamp clear embossing ink onto red cardstock. I treated my paper with an anti-static powder tool before stamping, just to make sure that my heat embossing is going to be nice and neat. I added gold embossing powder over the stamping, and now I'm using my heat tool to melt the powder and set it in place. If you've never done heat embossing, although I'm pretty sure all of you have, but in case you are brand new to this channel and you're brand new to stamping, when you do heat embossing, by the way, that's a fabulous technique, you want to make sure to warm your heat tool away from your paper. So let it run for a few seconds and then bring it to the paper, but move it. So keep it moving. This will help prevent your paper from warping. Your paper is going to warp a little bit no matter what, but if you move the heat tool, it's going to help with the warping. Okay, I next used a paper cloth and I removed the leftover anti-static powder from my paper. You could see that white or milky residue on my paper. You don't want to have that. You want to make sure you remove that. And next, I'm going to add some ink blending. So even though we are working on colored cardstock, so we have red cardstock, I'm going to add a bit more color to this cardstock, a bit more interest by ink blending. I don't want to ink blend the entire thing. I want to ink blend just the bottom half. So I first used the same Cranberry ink. I added a little bit of ink blending, and then I came in with brick ink, that slightly darker red, and I added a bit more of that darker red at the bottom. Once again, I used my cloth to remove any ink, especially ink that was sitting on top of the heat embossing. Heat embossing will resist the Simon Says Stamp positively saturated inks, so yay for that. And next I'm using coordinating die, and once again, best over craft tape. I've taped the die in place and I'm sending that through my die cutting machine. I'm doing that off camera, and voila, we have our sentiment ready. This is going to go onto our card like so. Now, before we add the sentiment onto the card, I die cut another panel, another sentiment outline, like a blank sentiment piece from the same red cardstock, and I'm going to glue the two pieces together. This is something I like to do to add sturdiness and stability to my pieces, especially if I plan to pop them up. And I knew that I was going to foam mount this onto my card. I am foam mounting this because I have quite a busy background and I want to help this sentiment stand out, and adding or using foam adhesive and adding this with the help of foam adhesive onto my card is going to help me achieve that. So I'm going to have a little bit of space under the sentiment, and the sentiment is going to, or the sentiment layer is going to cast a shadow, and that's going to help separate that from the background. Okay, next I added some embellishments onto my card, and you can see that my kitties decided to help me. I was trying to keep them away from my work area, but you know, they kind of like the embellishments. I'm using the Star Bright embellishment mix from Simon Says Stamp, and I'm just adding a couple of little sequins here and there to add just a tiny bit of bling and sparkle onto this card. So here's a look at the finished projects I have for you today, created with the Simon Says Stamp Festive Bough pattern stencils. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you feel inspired to create. Thanks so much for joining me today. All the supplies used for these projects are listed and linked in the video description below. Thanks again. Love you guys, and I'll see you again next time.
Hi there, I'm Heidi, Simon's mama and founder at SimonsSaysStamp.com. Thank you so much for watching our video. If you like what you just saw, be sure to press the thumbs up and subscribe to see more great content.